Good morning to everyone joining us for the webinar Defending Judicial Independence in Authoritarian Context Experience from Latin America and Eastern Europe. We thank our guests for taking the time to connect with us. Our main objective is to exchange experience on the impact of authoritarian governments seeking to concentrate power without checks and balances in the independence of judicial branches, as well as to discuss measures that citizens and other sectors can take to counter the effects of judicial. Please feel free to share any questions or comments on our social media. We'll address them at the end of the session. Now I'll turn it over to Susana Camacho, our coordinator of Justice Program at Mexico Evalúa. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Good morning in Mexico and the United States. Good afternoon to those connecting from Europe. Thank you for joining this webinar. We will talk with experts about the situation in Mexico and countries in Eastern Europe and Latin America regarding the trend toward weakening judicial powers as a part of a strategy to concentrate power in the executive branch, a party, or some powerful group that does not want judicial oversight and democratic controls. We thank you on behalf of the Director of Mexico Evalúa, Mariana Campos, and our entire team. We are honored and delighted to have with us in this discussion people with long careers in justice issues. We have Judge Dorota Zabludowska from Poland, Ekaterina Baksanova. She's a researcher in the Institute for Economic Markets in Bulgaria, and Jaime Chavez Alor. He is Mexican, and he is the Associate General Director from the Van Centers, which is dedicated to supporting countries in Latin America with studies related to justice and democratic strengthening. Thank you all for participating today. Unfortunately, Inasun will not be able to join us today due to personal reasons, but we hope she's well. The format will be as follows. Each speaker will have 10 minutes presentation in the first round, answering a couple of questions, and then each person will have another 5 minutes to respond to the comments made by the other participants. Finally, we will close with some questions from the audience. Following this webinar, we will also have a podcast in Spanish for our Hispanic audience and a policy brief in English and in Spanish that will be able in our page of mexicoevalua.org and our social media networks. Let's get to the topic at hand. I will try to summarize the current situation in Mexico. At the end of 2024, the majority party passed a constitutional reform that changes the way judges are appointed in Mexico and the structure of the judiciary. Mexico is a federal country, so the constitutional reform affects federal judges and courts in all 32 states. This constitutional reform was possible because the ruling party has the necessary majority in both houses of Congress to change the constitution. Now, the way that judges are elected no longer depends on their experience and track record, but rather all judges are elected by popular vote. This form of elections allows candidates who may not have experience or who have questionable backgrounds to become judges. On June 1st, we had the first election of this kind. The Supreme Court, half of the federal judges, electoral magistrates, and 1/3 of the state judges were elected in this way. Only 12% of the electorate participate in these elections, and we had what was called Operación Acordeón, which consisted of giving captive voters of government a written guide on which candidates have to vote for. The 2024 and 2025 judicial reform profoundly transformed the judicial system in Mexico by replacing career service with the popular vote. This change, far from strengthening the legitimacy of the judiciary, has exposed significant risk to its independence. According to the United Nations, Organization of American States, and in Mexico, for instance, the Judicial Electoral Observatory, these first judicial elections showed irregularities that point towards a growing political capture of the judicial system. At the same time, also, the constitution in Mexico was reformed to eliminate autonomous constitution bodies such as the National Institute for Transparency, Access to Information and Protection of Personal Data, Federal Economic and Competition Commission, Federal Telecommunications Institute, Energy Regulatory Commission, and National Hydrocarbons Commission. And also, recently, was modified the amparo trial, which is our habeas corpus, weaken institutional counterweights, reduce legal certainty, and undermine citizen confidence and investment. The constitutional reform to the federal and local judicial branches was published on September 15th, 24, and only to mention some of the risks to independence and quality of justice identified, we have some examples. Uh, One reform consists in popular vote as a mechanism to selecting judges and magistrates instead of a career service, implies the risk of politicization of judges and cooptation by partisan, economic, or criminal interest. Another reform where requirements to be a candidate for judge were significantly modified. For instance, right now in Mexico, to be candidate for a judicial charge, we need some letters from neighbors, 8 points during university studies, and no experience is necessary. The risk is that the knowledge and skills of the judges are not guaranteed. The mechanism for selecting candidates to compete in the election depends on the executive branch, the Congress, that is dominated in both chambers by a single party, and the judicial branch, which in this last election of 2025, election the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, didn't send candidates because it involved violations of the rights of judges who were forced to leave their post. This implies a risk of checks and balances on other powers that are not guaranteed if they all come from the same party. Also in the reform, we can find that the Federal Judiciary Council was eliminated and replaced with a judicial administration body. This body is responsible for providing the resources that judges have to work with. And finally, a closing example, was created a judicial disciplinary tribunal with the power to initiate disciplinary proceedings against members of the judiciary. This implies the risk of sanction for judges who rule against the government. When the rules governing judge change, it weakens the certainty about how and when lawsuits, contracts, or permits will be resolved. Business relies on this certainty for long-term planning in sectors such as energy, infrastructure, and telecommunications. Projects can face delays or inconsistent decisions regarding authorizations, permits, or certification, but also undermines human rights of the common citizens. Judges, being elected by popular vote, are not only more susceptible to political or popularity pressures, but also are more likely to lack technical expertise. These factors can lead to less predictable rulings. the perception that Mexico is not fulfilling its commitments to independent tribunals can lead to higher legal costs, uncertainty about compensation, and reputational risk for the country. And well, this is a very, very short summary of judicial reforms in Mexico. But now I will give the participations to our guest, Dorota, Ekaterina, Jaime, please. If you can, in this first intervention, based on your experiences in your countries, in the case of Jaime, his low knowledge about Latin American case, why and how is the judiciary attack as a strategy to concentrate power, whether in the president, the party, or a group of people? And what form of resistance against this weakening have had any impact on protecting judges in your experience? And which do you recommend to follow in Mexico? Dorota, if you can answer this question from the perspective of judges. Caterina, if you answer from the vision of think tanks and the private sector, and Jaime, if you can give us the perspective of international actors and civil society pressures that we can improve to defend the independence of judges, we will be very thankful. So if you are agree, I will give the participation to first to Dorota.
All right, thank you. Listening to Susanna is somewhat sounds like the Polish story, although we had a better ending, I think. If I prepared a short presentation also in mind in view with our guests who don't speak English that well. Oh yeah, thank you. So Susanna said it started with a party gaining majority in both chambers of the parliament, and it is exactly what happened in Poland in 2015. A party called, ironically, Law and Justice came to power. They won the elections and they had the possibility to rule by themselves. They didn't need any coalition. So they had both chambers of the parliament, and moreover, their candidate won the presidential elections. In Poland, it's the legal process is like this: the law goes to the parliament, first chamber, second chamber, and then the president needs to sign the law. So with this combination, they could adopt any law in overnight, basically, and that was what they were doing. So next slide, please. And we had a stable democracy. That's what we thought. We had our constitutional court, we had our Supreme Court, we had our free media, everything. The prosecutor's office was independent. And guess what? Just over 3 years, most of those were gone. First of all, they took over the Constitutional Tribunal. So the Constitutional Tribunal began to rule in favor of the political power, not taking into concern the constitution itself. Then they took the prosecutor's office, because the prosecutor's office in Poland was independent from the government. And after the changes, it was melted with the Ministry of Justice. So the Minister of Justice became the Prosecutor General, which meant that they could follow anyone they didn't like with criminal charges, and they could protect anyone they wanted by not pressing the charges against these people. Finally, in 2017, in the summer, they came for the Supreme Court. We found out that the party is going to send all the Supreme Court judges to retirement and replace them with new ones. Next slide, please. So this is this didn't go unnoticed by society, because people started to protest. Now we can see a photo of the people protesting in front of the Constitutional Court. And next, the prosecutor's office. And next, and this is the Supreme Court. After we found out that they are going to fire all the Supreme Court judges, our Polish Judges Association, Justitia, alongside with citizens, organized something that was called Chain of Lights. We called upon the people to come in front of the Supreme Court and to circle it with lights. And you can see a sign on the building of the Supreme Court. And it wasn't the judge's idea, it was the citizens' idea to write, "This is our court." And this is the idea that should be in the mind of anyone who thinks about judicial independence, that the courts belong not to the judges, not to the politicians, but to the citizens, because only if the courts belong to the citizens, justice is done. Next slide, please. After the protests in 2017, the Chain of Light, a miracle happened, because when the law on the Supreme Court went through the parliament and it was ready for the president to sign, the president, due to the protest, because we had protests not only in Warsaw, our capital, but also in very many smaller cities, where for 10 days people would gather in front of courts with lights protesting against this law. The president decided to put a veto on the law, so the law didn't come into force. So the process of taking over the Supreme Court took much longer, and it wasn't successful in the end. But then changes in the courts began, because the judiciary was the last obstacle to absolute power. And I agree with what Susanna said, that it is not about the judges, it is not about the courts themselves. It's about being unaccountable, and it's about doing whatever the political power wants to do without paying the price. So the judges are supposed to be the controllers, then you need to get rid of them. So in Poland, presidents of courts were exchanged, and when judges protested, and the National Council of Judiciary was also exchanged into a politicized one, which was very serious. Then the judges protested against it, and they created a special disciplinary court, just like they did last year in Mexico. And they tried to sanction judges with disciplinary proceedings. I had some disciplinary proceedings myself, and also suspending judges for applying the European law. Do we have another slide? I don't remember. Yeah, so this is a slide from my personal disciplinary trial, where actually people came to the trial and they defended us. So every trial of a judge was accompanied with a crowd of people who are protecting us from these sanctions. And in the end, if I may, I think there is one more. Yeah. In the end, when we had no National Council of Judiciary, when we had no court presidents who would protect us, when we had no Ministry of Justice, it was the Judicial Association, Polish Judges Association, Justitia, that actually played the role of being the voice of the judiciary, of organizing the actions against the sanctions and against the disciplinary proceedings and against the changes in the law. So it was a leader of resistance and protection of judicial independence. And having been familiar with the story of Mexican resistance, I wish that you had a Justitia yourselves, because it was it's a story that's heartbreaking for me and for many people of the world, that the judiciary would be taken over and people would be left without protection. So I think I will stop here, and I will go on about what can be done in the next round, if that's according to the plan.
Thank you, Dorota. And is very I don't know, strange, no? Here, the similitudes between our countries,
Similarities. Yes.
similarities, and I don't know, this issue about the time to destroy democratic controls so fast
Yes.
is what we are living right now. This judicial reform in Mexico, well, has less than a year, and in 1 year
Yes.
happened all this.
It seems impossible.
Yes. Thank you, Dorota. And now we give the participation to Katerina, please.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you, Dorota, for the very interesting case in Bulgaria. We are very familiar with it. Actually, the case of Bulgaria is a very particular one, because as opposed to Mexico and as opposed to even Poland and Hungary, even those members of the EU, in Bulgaria, we didn't have such an infringement and erosion of judicial independence from the main entrance, from such blunt erosion, because we never had what Dorota mentioned, like independent prosecutor general prosecution and free media. And we had that to a certain extent, but never to a full extent. For decades, our judiciary was perceived as corrupt or inefficient, and this was even a condition before our EU accession. During the EU accession and after it, we and Romania were the first countries where the cooperation and verification mechanism was installed in order to see if we will be able to make our judiciary independent. So we were never that free to begin with. And probably that's why we never had such blunt reforms that would turn around democratically functioning mechanisms. What happened and is happening in Bulgaria is more subtle and more long-term process, capturing judiciary through the back door, sort of speaks. Yeah, we do have very aggressive campaigns against particular judges, but we never had such a reform turning the judiciary upside down. And why? Because power elites didn't have to. Something to begin with, the Constitution of 1991, this is the post-communist democratic constitution of Bulgaria, introduced or conceived a flawed model of how the judiciary was governed. Our Supreme Judicial Council, which is the focal point, the body that is governing the judiciary, meaning, and judiciary in Bulgaria includes both judges and prosecutors. This body is responsible for appointments, for promotions, demotions, disciplinary actions, the budget, everything you can think of with relation to the judiciary. Still to this day, although there was a 2015 constitutional reform with regard to the judiciary, and this body was separated in judicial council, judges college or chamber, and prosecutorial one, and a plenum above them both. Still to this day, we don't have the basic European standard for judicial independence, judges elected by judges to be a majority in this council. Although there have been a few changes in the constitution with regard to the judiciary. So it was an kind of an easy task for those in power. If I have to quote a politician of ours, he said, if you have the judiciary, if you have the courts and the media, you can rule in peace. So this is a strategic plan that rolled out through the years. And the institutional capture began with the Judicial Council. Because there are 3 ex officio members, the 2 presidents of 2 Supreme Courts, the Prosecutor General, who is also omnipotent and has concentrated a lot of power in our country, and can be very instrumental in the hands of political actors. So he's very influential with the prosecutorial chamber. And half of the members of the body are elected by parliament. So you can imagine that from the offset, there are problems. And through appointments at key positions in the judiciary, for example, presidents of courts years ago, nowadays, even rank and file judges who entered the system through flawed competitions, there are data of kids, relatives, everyone going into the system, not on merits-based competitions. Basically, the last competitions, if you go through them, everybody is related to someone. I'm not saying that people who are related to someone shouldn't become, but 90% or more, it raises doubts and it raises questions. There is data for parallel justice networks. One of the heads of these parallel justice networks, this is organized crime, basically, working within the system with judges and prosecutors especially, was shot dead. Gunshot, I mean. He was threatening a prominent judge in Bulgaria, Judge Vladislava Tsarigradska. And she was a whistleblower. And although she spoke of this criminal circus in the judiciary a couple of years before he was shot dead, nobody paid attention to her. Also, she tried to initiate all kinds of institutional mechanisms to do that. So another instrument to, how to wield influence over the judiciary is intimidation and abuse of a particular individual judges. Namely, the Bulgarian Judges Association members. This organization has been very instrumental in, defending judicial independence, criticizing the status quo, the political influence in the judiciary. Judges from these organizations for years have been institutionally harassed. When we begin with Judge Miroslava Tudorova, who was even fired from the Judicial Council. She won a case before the European Court of Human Rights. And now we go to Judge Vladislava Tsarigradska, who first there were media smear campaigns against her, horrendous threats against her life and the life of her children and her family, and other state institutions participate in that. There is data that in Bulgaria there are around 2,000 judges. There is data that the prosecution office opened around 800 cases against judges to, check them, investigate them. None of them concluded with state sanction, some sanction, or no charges were pressed. But personal information for these judges was gathered, and blackmails and all other not very nice tactics could be used and are used against them. And as you can imagine, and there are 150 warrants against judges again for special surveillance means. So you can imagine that judges are put under a great threat, and this creates a chilling effect. And this chilling effect can be seen also by another data that we gathered. There are 30,000 judicial withdrawals or self-recusals or self-disqualifications, meaning the judge himself or herself decides to not hear a case because of he or she thinks could be interested or biased towards a case. There are 2,000 judges for this year alone. The year is not over yet. There are over 30,000 self-recusals. So judges are scared. And the state does not provide any adequate and effective safeguard for judges who are being threatened. Actually, Judge Vladisava Tsarigradska was first threatened. The first attempt to wield influence over her was for requesting her to withdraw from a case. So this tool is also used in that regard. So as you can, and at the same time, the salaries of judges are rapidly rising the last years. I'm not saying judges shouldn't receive high salaries. They should, because of the hard work they are doing. But in Bulgaria, it has become a way to, the carrot and the stick coexist at the same time. The comfort is provided, and at the same time, if you speak up against those in power, you will be institutionally, and not only institutionally, harassed and abused. This is, of course, in a nutshell what's going on in Bulgaria. Unfortunately, it's not only as in Mexico or in Poland, just a party winning an election, having the majority. In Bulgaria, it's a bit more complex because nowadays that doesn't even matter. There is one name that is only being called, which is basically pulling the strings of everything. And in Bulgaria, organized crime and mafia and the state are seemingly, unfortunately, working together. And I think this is, in a nutshell, what's going on. What we do, I can share a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katy. And one of the suggestions that we have done regarding the judicial Mexican reform is exactly what you said at the end. The reform changed everything in the judiciary in Mexico, but nothing about the protection of the life of the judges, the life, and not only the judges, their families, and whatever, all the ways that a criminal organization has to achieve to harass to the judges. So this is a very, very concerning in Mexico, because the violence in elections also increase in Mexico. During all the elections, we can see points of more homicides, and all the violence increases. And in the latest governments, we also have some very, very concerning cases about violence against judges, lawyers, and many people that is in the justice system. So
Can I only add, really sorry for interrupting you, but a few days ago, a prosecutor was hammered almost to death I mean, he's okay now, he's in the hospital, but he was allegedly one of these, families, as there was a prosecutor who testified, and she said they call it the family. So he was hammered, with a hammer. He was almost killed. And what Judge Tsarigradska shared during one of her hearings before the council is she said many, I don't know how many, but some judges are calling her, saying that they are also threatened, but they are afraid to share it in public.
Yes.
So I'm happy that in Bulgaria there are judges who can be an example of what could be done, and what Dorota is. I mean, you're an inspiration. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Katerina. And Jaime, if you want to share with us what you have seen in Latin America.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jaime Chavez Alor. First of all, thank you, Susana and Mexico Evalúa team for inviting me to participate in this very important webinar. Based on the Van Center's work in 15 Latin American countries, we have seen a clear and troubling pattern. Controlling or attacking the judiciary is one of the most effective strategies to concentrate power. This tactic undermines democracy, secures impunity, and silences dissent. The Van Center for International Justice, being part of the New York City Bar Association, has a great interest in the strength of judicial independence, being the backbone of the rule of law, and because it's not only relevant to the protection of human rights, but also judicial independence provides legal certainty needed for good business environment, investment, and economic development. So why the judiciary is targeted? Per our work in the world, our mandate is global, but we have done a lot of work in Latin America with judges. We have identified various reasons to target the judiciary. One, the elimination of checks and balances, because without independent courts, there is no limit to other branches of government or groups of power. And independent courts limit authoritarian regimes. So it's not a coincidence that in every authoritarian regime, as we've heard before, the first target is always the judiciary. And in the region, we have seen this very clearly. In Nicaragua, a constitutional amendment recently abolished separation of powers, placing all authority under the co-presidents in Nicaragua. In Venezuela, judicial capture facilitated the consolidation of an authoritarian rule. So it's not a coincidence. Every authoritarian regime starts attacking the independence of the judiciary. Another reason, so the second reason, is because it can become an instrument for impunity. When captured, the judiciary, the corruption cases stall, and the human rights violations remain unpunished. A very good, bad example of this is Guatemala. In Guatemala, we have a corrupt pact, which is a group of people, individual organizations, that try to manipulate the judicial appointments to block corruption prosecutions, persecute independent judges, prosecutors, journalists, and human rights defenders. We are seeing now that judges, independent, well-known, international recognized judges, are now in exile, fleeing from persecution in Guatemala. The Attorney General in Guatemala, who has been internationally sanctioned by more than 50 countries in the world, in conspiracy with corrupt judges, also sanctioned internationally, have led some of these efforts. So, as I was saying, more than 70 Guatemalans, former judges, prosecutors, lawyers, are in exile. Jose Ruben Zamora, a world-known journalist, has also been in prison for 3 years for his work against corruption. And the problem here is that there isn't a strong independent judiciary that can stop these abuses of power. Another example of this is the detention of human rights defender and anti-corruption advocate Ruth Lopez in El Salvador. Because of her anti-corruption work and open opposition of the Bukele regime. She has been imprisoned, violating very, very basic due process rights. So, how the judiciary is attacked? I'll say 5 clear tactics on some examples. So the first one is institutional capture, I'm sorry, is court packing. So adding judges, more judges to have more people close to the specific regime, legal reforms to, instead of strengthening the work of the judiciary, to weaken the work of the judiciary. Early retirement laws, for example. So in El Salvador, again, one of the first things the president did was to remove the judges from the constitutional chamber. That was his first obstacle. Then he passed a law to retire judges early, and many of the judges that were in open opposition of the activities of the government that were clearly violating rights were dismissed, and stacked the judiciary with loyalists. Another example that we've seen is budget constraints. So if there's a way to provide the judiciary with the bare minimum, it's going to be very hard for judges to do their work. We have seen this in Bolivia, where the judiciary is in a terrible financial situation. And this, of course, impedes the work of judges. But the ultimate affected by this is society in any country, particularly in this example in Bolivia. The second tactic would be persecution and criminalization. So I've spoken a little bit about this. So false charges, harassment, the exile of independent judges and prosecutors. The bad example is Guatemala, as I have mentioned before. The third tactic is arbitrary transfers and disciplinary actions. Judges reassigned to different courts or sanctioned for rulings unfavorable to those in power. We have seen this a lot lately in Honduras. So judges are being transferred to different courts in the other side of the country without any kind of justification after decisions contrary to government interests. The fourth way in which the judiciary is attacked is direct attacks to judges. So instead of appealing decisions, so if I'm the government and I don't agree with that decision, I can appeal that. But instead of doing that, I decide to attack judges personally. In some countries, we've seen presidents or high-level officials showing the pictures of judges they're directly attacking, sharing their addresses, their home addresses, which is so dangerous. And we have seen this in Colombia, in Ecuador, in Peru, in Costa Rica. The president directly attacked the president of the Judges Association because of her international work visibilizing what's happening in Costa Rica. And of course, we have seen this in Mexico. This is very dangerous because it undermines judicial independence as a whole, but also because it puts in danger specific individuals. And the fifth tactic I want to talk about is a narrative manipulation. So framing judges as corrupt or as obstacles to pursue certain agenda, progress to justify reforms. That has also happened as an example in Costa Rica, which is a country that once seemed as a model of judicial independence and democracy in Central America, now faces a president attacking the judiciary and seeking alignment with his agenda. So what are the consequences of all this? Democratic backsliding and erosion of the rule of law, institutionalized impunity for corruption and human rights violations. In extreme cases as Nicaragua and Venezuela, complete collapse of checks and balances. Civil society, human rights defenders, and everyone becomes vulnerable because there is no judiciary to defend a person against any kind of abuse by the government. But also judges become vulnerable to attacks as there seems to be public justification for attacking them. And let me give you an example of what's happening right now in the United States. Federal judges across the US have been targeted with a harassment tactic known as pizza doxing, like cheese pizza doxing. This involves sending unsolicited pizza deliveries to judges' homes, often late at night, as a way to intimidate them and signal that the sender knows their personal address. In some cases, the pizzas have been ordered under the name of the son of Judge Esther Salas, who was tragically murdered in 2020 by a litigant posing as a delivery driver. This makes the tactic even more chilling as it weaponizes a past tragedy to instill fear. Judges report that these deliveries are not random. They often occur when they are presiding over high-profile or politically sensitive cases, including challenges to executive actions. So, attacking the judiciary as a whole or specific judges is never acceptable because it destroys the foundation of democracy. And it is true that corrupt judges exist. But if that's the case, there are legitimate disciplinary mechanisms to address these issues. So deciding to reform the whole judiciary system is not a solution for this. The Van Center will publish very soon, hopefully this month, the result of a survey we conducted in the region with more than 270 judges. And let me give you a little preview of some of these results. 84% of respondents consider that the judicial independence has been compromised. 31% attribute this interference to the executive or the legislative branches, while 15% cite hierarchical superiors within the judiciary. Respondents also reported pressure from political parties, organized crime, the media, social networks, and other non-traditional actors. A wide range of pressure tactics were identified, including threats, direct threats, political or economic incentives, arbitrary transfer, denial of promotions, selective audits, excessive workloads, negative press coverage, and instrumental use of disciplinary and criminal proceedings. 68% indicated that these pressures seek to influence judicial decisions directly, and 60% reported knowing colleagues who have been pressured to issue a specific ruling. So we can see this is not isolated. This is systematic, and that's why this situation is so concerning. I'm gonna finish just saying that judicial independence is not a privilege. It's a cornerstone of democracy. Attacks on the judiciary are systemic strategies to dismantle democratic governance. Defending it requires international cooperation and strong civil society engagement. Thank you, Susana.
Thank you, Jaime. And I think, almost all our countries in Latin America, we didn't have a perfect judicial system, but right now the erosion is right now and is growing so fast that is very difficult right now thinking about an immediately solutions. No, well. I think one problem that across all the Latin American region is that we weren't well know about the work of judges. No, we have in Mexico. We also had these protests from some sectors of citizenship and judicial personnel defending judicial independence, but they were ignored. Going back to the last round in Dorota's case, do you think that having had the relatively recent experience of emerging from communist and experienced democracy help people to embrace the court, and what do you think about the importance of judges joining an association that this service of Jaime is appointing also to build a huge association of judges in all Latin America.
Well, there is one association of judges in Latin America. It's part of the association that I represent too, and our colleague Adriana Orocho is the president of the Latin American group of the International Association of Judges. So we are happy to be there for any judge, and especially Adriana, and to monitor, give support, and help judges who are threatened, which is very difficult from what I hear in your region, because here in Europe, we at least we are not well, in Bulgaria, apparently judges are persecuted but still the EU is watching, so it's not that obvious, and you don't have the EU yourselves. I'm quite overwhelmed. I mean, I've known everything that Jaime was talking about, and still it sounds like an autocrat's textbook to absolute power. And I think that we should write our own. And you are absolutely right. In Poland, people reacted because they remembered the communism. And it's like a vaccine. Once you got it, then you're aware of the germs coming in. So it was easier for us because people could be easily mobilized, and they knew even before we knew that something was wrong, the people already were in the streets. So it was easier. But when you are in a critical situation, like in the many countries that Jaime mentioned, you need allies. You need the association because they can be the voice, and it's always, especially if the association is part of a bigger one, like the International Association of Judges, it is more difficult to attack the association. Unfortunately, the Mexican association that was representing Mexican judges so far is a loyalist association, as it turns out. So we will be taking action to monitor that association and see if they are playing according to the rules of the IAJ, because it seems they are not. But I will not I will not give a verdict before we have our investigation. Still, association is a good idea, but also all the legal environment, like lawyers, like law students, everyone can be helpful, and also citizens. But in order to have the citizens understand the importance of the court, you need education. So we learned that we need to keep a dialogue with the society in Poland, because we are, even though judges are not elected, they are the power that is closest to the people, because we deal with their daily problems. But we were taught in our education as judges that we are not supposed to discuss with people, to explain to people. We should speak through our verdicts and be the mouth of the law. And that's, yeah, I can see that it's the same in Bulgaria, and probably it's the same in most countries, because it's very convenient to for the political power, for the judiciary not to have a voice. So we started with demonstrations in the streets, which is not a place for the judges to be, but sometimes they have to. Like the president of your Supreme Court went to the streets, and but also we started education with legal cafes where we met with citizens, and judges they knew from from posters would meet with them and talk to them about what about the importance of the independence of judiciary, of democracy, what the courts mean to the people. We also got in touch with lawyers, and sometimes we do education together, because a judge is not supposed, for example, to say there is a solution to a certain legal problem, but if we have a lawyer, they can do that. and that brings judges closer to society, and it makes them more trustworthy. Also, it is important to be on social media. So our association got help from public relations people who did it free of charge because they were involved in protection of democracy, and they helped us work on our image as judges to be more approachable, to be more likable. So all these factors combined made us stronger, more reliable, and more difficult to get.
Thank you very much, Dorota. Katerina, do you think the private sector can exert pressure for independent judiciary, even though they maybe currently be accustomed to be involved in these corruption networks? And what role does the European Union plays, for instance, in Bulgaria?
Well, the private sector can be involved, yes. In our country, the experience is very contradictory. There are big businesses that are intertwined with the government because they receive a lot of money through procurements from the government. Then part of the money they give back to political parties, either for elections or under the table. So we are kind of used to that. But at the same time, there is now a big entrepreneurs, IT or fintech firms and companies. This new generation of companies, especially related to the IT sector, but not limited to, who participate in the conversation. I mean, they join the government on some issues, but for example, recently, one of the big associations of big businesses in Bulgaria, together with us, we developed a rule book of what to do if state agency security or anti-corruption commission or prosecutor come to your firm, because we have instances of businesses being harassed and being totally depleted of resources by the prosecutor's office even. Last week, a woman testified in court that there were two boxes of one box of 5 kilograms of gold and the other one 1 kilogram of gold taken from this big business for elevators. And these 5 kilograms were given to the prosecutor general. This is what she testified in court. And one was given to another prosecutor. So you can see that some businesses, that's what I'm saying. It's really contradictory, but we are trying, and this is why we try to use hard data and to break down complex legal ideas and concepts into understandable language without being profane, you know. And I think what is happening to judges really tells a very clear story of how judges with integrity are being bullied, really bullied. And people, civil society are standing behind them. They are supporting them. There were many protests on the streets in that regard. And the very least that we all do as this coalition of NGOs and professional organizations, the Bulgarian Judges Association, free media, journalistic investigation, is at least to prevent the government from fully controlling the narrative that these judges are bad and corrupt, and we are trying to get rid of them, get rid of the system for them. The role of the EU is, you know, for Bulgaria especially, the carrot was the EU accession. And afterwards, the stick was not really effective. The cooperation and verification mechanism, now the rule of law reports, it's dubious. It's not as effective as we would like to be. It's better than nothing for sure, But our governing elites are very good at mimicking reforms and using them to turn bodies in for their own interests. For example, years ago, for the anti-corruption agenda, they said, of course we will fight corruption. We will establish new courts, specialized criminal court and specialized prosecutors' offices. And what they did is they harassed businesses and people and oppositions. The story I told you about the goat was done by prosecutors in this state. But what I want to say is that we are not powerless, because due to opposition of NGOs, of the professional organization, of free media, of businesses even, these structures were closed down, because of course there was also political representation of our interests. That is also important. We managed to push for two constitutional reforms with regard to the judiciary, 2015, 2023. The last one was revoked by the Constitutional Court. But still, the powers of the prosecutor generals were somewhat limited, and finally there is a mechanism for his investigations. And the EU was supporting all these reforms throughout the way. So it's important to have an external voice and support that can, feed into your cause. And what helped us also was to translate judicial independence not as self-preservation for judges, but as a value and a duty for every citizens, because judges are those who are fighting for us, for our rights and interests, after all. And another level is using data, and also because I am part of an economic institute, translating judicial independence into economic language, saying that corruption, political influence, unpredictable case law increases transactional costs, deters investment, and damages competitiveness. And there were instances of businesses getting away from Bulgaria because of that.
Okay.
So
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Caterina. And in this sense, Jaime, how do you think about international litigation or pressure from other countries can be used to protect judges? I don't know, in Latin America it's very difficult that this have some impact, no? But it exists. And if you can share with us any positive experience in our region that have had an impact on judicial independence. Well, I know the problems are so many in all the region, but if you can share something that could be positive.
Thank you, Susana. There are definitely some positive experiences, but I'll talk about that at the end of my participation so that we end in a positive note. So regarding the first part of your question, so I think continuing to raise awareness is very important internationally. Continue to raise awareness with the international legal community is very important. And as I say this, I'm thinking that it should be international and national legal community. We've seen in our work, because we're part of the New York City Bar Association, so we have a lot of interaction with bar associations, with lawyers, international law firms. We've been in countries with lawyers from private sector. We ask them, what do you think of the situation of judicial independence in your country? And more than once, the response we've gotten is, we don't know, because we don't litigate, so we don't care. And the point that we've made again and again is that even if lawyers are not appearing before judges, even if judges are not litigating, it's very important that the legal community, nationally and internationally, is aware of what's happening with judicial independence and integrity in a country. In Mexico, after the reform was approved, we saw that a lot of law firms immediately said, well, it doesn't matter. We'll work around it because we're gonna do everything with arbitration. So we need to make sure that we are including arbitration in all of our operations, contracts, legal instruments. And it is true that arbitration can be an option, but it doesn't solve the problem. It doesn't solve the issue. And a lot of the work that we have been doing is around this, to make sure that the legal community understands the implications of not having judicial independence. So I think this one's very important. The international advocacy before the international and regional mechanisms continues to be very important, because at the end of the day, states, or some states, care about their international reputation. So the work that the UN Special Rapporteurs on Independence of Judges and Lawyers, the work that the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, in the case of the Latin American region, can do is very important. Strategic litigation, I think it's also important, nationally and internationally. So bringing these cases before the domestic courts is important, and bringing these cases before the international mechanisms, if that's the Inter-American Commission or the UN system, continues to be important. Not only because we want to stop what's happening now, but we want to prevent this from happening in the future. So the Van Center for International Justice is representing a group of federal judges, Mexican federal judges, against the judicial reform. And the goal of this petition before the Inter-American Commission is not to stop the reform. The reform was approved, it's happened already. But because the example that Mexico is giving the region is a bad example. And nowhere in the international standards it says that judges can't be elected. But if that's going to be the case, then we need the international mechanisms, the UN and the Inter-American Commission, to set the standards on how to elect judges. Because we need standards to determine that the candidates should comply with certain requirements based on merits, ethics, integrity, professional experience, that right now are not being considered in the model that Mexico is proposing to other countries. And we need standards to prevent this keeps happening in the future. We need to continue with the regional monitoring and reporting. So continuing documenting attacks on judges, continuing documenting all of these instances where the judicial independence is being attacked. It's important to show that it's not only against one judge because that person had the bad luck of hearing a very high profile case. No, it's systematic. It's a strategy. So we need to continue documenting that and making sure that we can mobilize civil society organizations, international organizations, legal community at large, which includes not only law firms, but also academia, also companies, in this effort to accompany and support the efforts of the independent judges to protect their own independence. And the last thing I would say is building coalitions, and that's why I agree that judge associations are so important. So coalitions among judges, but also with other civil society organizations, with bar associations, with international networks that can amplify the pressure and provide some protection mechanisms. Going back to the good experience. So not everything is terrible in Latin America. We have some countries in which the judiciary remains strong, independent. It's never perfect, but there are some countries where checks and balances are more strong than others. And let me provide the example of the Dominican Republic. Right now, the Dominican Republic is in a good moment with its judiciary. It has had some reforms that have strengthened the work of judges. The judges haven't reported attacks on judicial independence in a few years. And this is important because it was not always like this. There was a time where judges were being transferred, judges were being attacked, judges fear for the work that they were doing. The judges, members of the association in the Dominican Republic, were concerned about what was happening there. The situation is now better. What happened? A lot of international coalition, but also political will in the Dominican Republic as to why judicial independence is important. So it is possible. My only caveat would be we can't allow this progress to be made on political will because it comes and goes. So if tomorrow we have a president in the Dominican Republic who doesn't like judicial independence, we'll have a setback. So we need to make sure that we institutionalize this progress and these changes to make sure that it can continue regardless of who comes into power, presidents, Congress, or others.
Thank you very much, Jaime. And I think we can speak hours and hours of all our experiences in so many countries, but the time is over. We have only 5 minutes, maybe for one or two questions from the public. I don't know, please, if we have any question.
Yes, we open a microphone for some questions of our public. I have one from Lorena Delgadillo. Ana Lorena Delgadillo asks, generally, when it comes to defending judicial independence, very few actors participate. The judiciary is very detached from the people. What will be your best advice for engaging citizens on this issue? Only a strong citizenry can confront an authorities capable of seizing control of the public prosecutor's office and the judiciary. Please feel free to answer.
I feel called to the blackboard as a judge. We have to de-learn everything we learned while studying. I mean, quit the complicated language, because we have to speak the way people speak for them to understand us, and it is a challenge. And I agree with Lorena in everything she wrote in her question. So we should start actually with our courtrooms, because when we deliver a decision, then it is for the parties, it's not for the court. So it's crucial that they know what happened in the court. And when we start in the court, we can go then in the schools, in institutions, and other places to talk to citizens about the rights. So it is important to emphasize that it's not about obligations, but it's about rights and it's about protection. Thank you.
If I can add something, I completely agree. And we've been very insistent with judge associations that the way in which judges communicate with society builds legitimacy. If society doesn't understand what the judges are saying, no one is going to come out in their defense when they're attacked. If society understands that the role of judges and the work that they do is important, they will definitely come to the protection of judges. And I think Mexico actually has a good example to show to the rest of the world, because Mexico is one of the countries that has been or has done more efforts in terms of the rulings of easy access. So these summaries, documents, sometimes audios, or other formats for rulings that were originally created for groups in situations of vulnerability, but they should be used widely. So to give you an example, a ruling that's relevant to a kid because he's deciding on who this kid is going to stay, his parents or other person. One of the judges decided to create a comic to explain the child how he was making this decision. And Mexico has done a lot of this. So I think Mexico has a good example on how to get the decisions and the work of judges closer to society, because this shouldn't happen only for children, but for society in general.
Thanks, Ekaterina. Do you want to add something?
Yeah, just 1 minute to add something that what our Bulgarian Judges Association is doing, and I think is very useful. They participate in civic education in schools. So basically helping young minds develop understanding of what rules are and what judges do is important. And they carry out these mock trials based on fairy tales like the Red Riding Hood, or whatever you can think of, and children from a young age can understand, distinguish good and bad, what's going on in the country. And from my experience here is that judges who have nothing to hide give interviews, go to media, explain, because they understand that in turbulent times, it's not only their acts that are the mouth of the law, because people do not understand these acts. The legalese is a bit more complicated. So when they go out and speak directly to the public, it's much more welcoming. And I think this works because in Bulgaria, when there is a abuse of particular judge, the public fights for these judges.
If I can add one thing, because I just wanted to show you something. This is a book. It's called Citizen's Lesson. So we have this project, and it's been promoted by the Ministry of Education. You can see the pictures? Yeah, so this is what we've been performing. It's about the Constitution and the rights.
No, and I remember when the criminal justice reform started in Latin America, the Chilean government made so much beautiful material for kids to explain all these changes, and the impact was not only in the kids but also in their families. I think sometimes we have we don't have to make so many things so so huge, but beginning with something simple like this. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Dorota, for the example. We have two other questions. One is, in addition to the effects we're seeing on foreign investment and the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, what other impacts can we expect in the international area? Susie, do you want to answer this one?
Well, yes. Well, I think the private sector is very will be desirable, that will be very engaged with the cause. Sometimes I think they are not also so well informed what it impact in their in their enterprises, no? But little by little, passing the time, having all these problems in the contracts, in the licensing, in the judicial processes, there's one moment where private sector will be impacted. No, so I think it's urgent to have this discussion in the terms of Katerina proposes, with this also this change of language in the economic terms. No, how judicial independence is convenient for environment of free economics or liberal economics. So I think is an sector, a sector where we have to work with. No, is urgent to the private sector also have this discourse in their minds.
If I can add something, I think one of the issues is that the impact of the reform probably won't be seen in the very short term. Of course, the new judges are still learning what it is that they have to do. We still have very experienced people working in the judiciary. But the effect of the decisions for the private sector won't necessarily be from one day to another. But also that's why it's important for all of these efforts that are happening now in Mexico to observe and monitor the work of the judiciary, to understand better what it is that's happening in reality. For the private sector, understanding that the effects can happen over time will be very important. Not only because there will be cases, very well-known cases, high-profile cases that the private sector will care about, and that everyone will be looking at what's happening at the specific court, but because there will be other cases that might be more silent but important for the private sector. So this monitoring will be relevant, and I think in some time we'll be able to tell exactly how this will impact the international area, the international investment, the practice of lawyers that want to do work in Mexico. So the USMCA conversation will start soon, very soon, but I think that we will need more information of what's happening.
Thanks. We have the last question, and I think it's a great question. How can we regain the independence of the judiciary once it is lost? Share good practices from your countries. Dorota, if you want to start with this one.
Oh, it's such a difficult question because we are having an issue of reinstating the independence of the judiciary because it's not easy to change the law. We have a new president who to finish up my first story, there was a change of power in 2023, but the old president stayed, and so they were waiting for him to end his term to finish the reforms, to reverse the process. But then another one was elected, then one who was expected, and this one will block anything that would rewind the previous changes. So my advice would be protect your judiciary while you still can, because then it's very difficult to go back or to create something new. And I am actually very pleased to hear about Dominican Republic as a role model, because I think they are putting a lot of effort, especially the president of the Supreme Court, to be close to the people, and that is very important, especially in such a difficult region. Thank you.
Thanks, Ekaterina.
May I add something? I think the first thing we should do is be proactive, not allowing the backslide, because there are signs when this will happen. It's very clear. It's kind of a textbook, especially if you lived it. So I think being very resistant in the beginning is important. For example, in our country, yes, we have a lot of issues. The judiciary is being captured as we speak because of a lot of negative selection, meaning random people are entering it. But still, for years, we have been pushing for reform. So being proactive in order to limit the power of the prosecutor general, to introduce basic standards for judicial independence in the Judicial Council, in its structure and functioning. So let's not wait for regaining it. Let's not use it. And I know it's very country specific. It's very tailor-made for each country. Because, for example, what Jaime said half an hour ago about salaries being low and transfers or secondments being used as punishment, these two things are used for punishment. In Bulgaria, these things are used for carrots. If you talk to old judges, they will tell you when they received lower salaries, they were more independent. And transfers now are done in higher instance courts or prosecutors' offices or in the capital. And these judges and prosecutors tend to be loyalist to the administrative heads that are transferring them. So it's really country specific to what should be done. But I think the first line of defense is not to allow it. The same as the court is, because the court is the last line of defense for authoritarian trends. So we should save it as, it's, if there is no courts effective and independent, there is no democracy.
Thanks, Jaime. Do you want to add something?
Probably just that, I agree that the best thing is to prevent, but we've seen many instances in which we are already too late. And I think Mexican society, for example, reacted way too late when the reform was already approved, probably. I think that there needs to be a lot of work to rebuild judicial independence. It needs a lot of different actors in the country to understand why it's important to rebuild what was lost. I think identifying the consequences of losing judicial independence will be a key motivation to understand why it is needed to recover it. So it's definitely hard. It will require a lot of work. I've said before that it's very easy to destroy, but it's very hard to rebuild. So I think it can happen. It requires a lot, but I am optimistic that it can be done. But there needs to be a lot of coordination and involvement of different actors in the country. And of course, as always, political will.
Thank you, Jaime. Susana, please give us the final remarks.
Well, I think from Mexico Evalúa, we are working, and as everybody says in this forum, we have to resist and we have to propose solutions. No, in that sense, I think and in Mexico Evalúa, we are working in producing civic education materials in the evaluations of the skills and performance of judges and judicial powers as institutions. Also, we are working in alliances to propose judicial electoral counter-reform with these characteristics that Jaime has mentioned, and also documenting, monitoring, and evaluation of the judicial reform to when we have the correct moment, we can also have the fundamentals and the solutions to recover the judicial independence. So we are working so hard in all of these activities, and it is a pleasure counting with experts, allies, as we have in this forum. And well, our homework in our countries is continue to be in touch, to share ideas to help the justice in our countries. Thank you very, very much for everybody and all the Mexico Evalúa team that was involved in this webinar.
Thank you,
very
Susana.
much.
Thanks, Dorota, Ekaterina, and Jaime, and all the people that follow the webinar. Thanks for joining us today. We prepare a document with the main points of our webinar that you can find it in our website, mexicoevalua.org. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a nice Friday.
Thank you.